All right, I think we're back here on week 9, part B of my lecture. So picking up, um, let's see, page 103. We're still in chapter 4, Reasons to Teach Academic Language and Academic Content. We understand, we've already talked about this. We know it's important to learn both the language and the content at the same time. It keeps it natural context. It has a real purpose. It's meaningful. And students need to learn the academics, of course. Okay, so when we teach and you start to write your lesson plans, all of you have started at least one, we want to remember that it is when we are addressing the parts of the language we're teaching that it's important to identify the language demands and the function and whether the students are going to use words like describe, analyze, summarize. We want to make sure it's clear what parts of the language we're focusing in on, and then about the skills. Are we going to have them practice discourse, speaking back and forth, a natural discourse, written discourse, listening, speaking, those 4 skills. So it is important to identify what in English language we're going to focus in on, as well as what we're going to focus in on the content. And we do that in our lesson planning. Okay, moving on to, oh, there's sheltered English. We already talked about this. Sounds like there's something going down the hallway, but we're going to ignore that. Sheltered English, again, it says, hey, that, we moved away from that. We moved away from content-based to sheltered English. Not necessarily. There's many great programs that use content-based, especially for students that are lower proficient or emerging students. Sheltered English is great, but you really have to have a lot of proficiency to start with the content first and support it, rather than starting with a language and adding content. So proficiency does have something to play into that. Okay, we see Stephen Krashen again. You're going to see him the rest of your life. He was so instrumental for teaching English language learners. Talks about comprehensible input, how input needs to be meaningful, and his input hypothesis, which talks about the idea of comprehensible input, and it's the idea of I plus 1. I being your comprehensible input. The plus 1 is the idea that it's a little bit out of reach. It's the idea that we want to challenge those students. Do you remember Vygotsky and the zone of proximal development? We talked about that in 185, and how we want to scaffold for students. And you want to make the information, if it's too easy, they're not invested, they're not learning. If you put it just a little bit in front of them and scaffold it, and they have to do the learning, that it's a lot more meaningful, and they will learn it more quickly. And this is what the input hypothesis is the I plus 1. The input plus a little bit, you want to put it to the next level of knowledge for those students so they reach. That's, again, discussed on page 106. You don't have to worry about CALA. Sometimes it's associated with particular states, so you can skip the CALA. Same thing with SADIE, SDAIE, Especially Designed Academic Instruction. That's really along the same ideas of sheltered English. As long as you really understand that in specially designed academic instruction in English, it's the same thing, that we're taking particular content and we're designing it to be effective with ELLs. SADIE's really big in California. Right now we're in New York. It's just make sure that you understand that it's a type of sheltered English. It's a type of content-based instruction. Let's see. Then, of course, we have our English language development proficiency levels for New York State. I've already put that up a couple weeks ago. Make sure you're familiar with those. Here it talks about them, and you have to know ours for New York State for your certification test and for EdTPA, so make sure you know those. Oh, and then it talks about assessments. Again, for New York State, we have 2 types of assessments. We have the NICETEL, which is New York State Identification Test for ELLs. And oh gosh, are you guys still I'm so sorry. You're looking at screen recorder. I did not move it for you. And I've already talked for 10 minutes. Someone needs, I wish you guys could, like, if this were live, if this were synchronous, you could actually raise your hand and say, I have a question, I need to change the screen. I'm so sorry. Here's the nice to tell. You can just click it, and for when you're an ESL teacher in public school, when you get a new student, a newcomer at the beginning of the year, all students take the nice to tell. It's the identification to see if a student qualifies and is identified as an English language learner, EAL, English as additional language student. And so you can look at that, and you'll be giving your students that. And then the other is the nice SLAT, and that's the New York State assessment test for English language learners. So that's why it's assessment test. AT is the nicest SLAT, and this is what you give to your students at the end of every year. They take the nicest SLAT, and you can see at what level, proficiency level, they're performing. So these are two tests you should be familiar with: a nice tell, nicest SLAT. So click on those links, that's why they're there, and familiarize yourself with them if you haven't already looked them up, which I know most of you probably saw that, but I better look that up. It talks about teaching standards in New York State. We now go with next generation. So what's amazing is how things have changed. That's no longer, we no longer use the ELP standards. We use next generation standards. We've talked about that. Yep, even Common Core. Nope, done. Done. Isn't that great? You don't need to know GLAD or KTEL, QTEL on 117. You should just understand on page 117 SIOP, Sheltered Instruction Observation Protocol. This is the same idea of sheltered English. The only difference is they've created kind of a guideline with it. Oh my gosh, am I down to 7? Oh, I thought it was 7 seconds. A guideline. And this comes on 117, 118. It really follows any type of great lesson plan. The first part is planning for the lesson. You know, what materials will I use? What are going to be my objectives? Then part 2 is the actual lesson. What am I teaching? What does it look like? How am I grouping students? And then the third part is the assessment. How am I making sure my students learned what I taught them, and how can I improve myself? Some of you who are already beginning EdTPA, this sounds familiar. This is exactly what EdTPA requires when you start doing your student teaching and you prepare your EdTPA, a portfolio. That's what it is. It's 3 parts. It's planning, it's the instruction, and it is the assessment. And that's what SIOP does. It's a Sheltered Instruction Observation Protocol. It just says, hey, you know what? We'd like to put these things in order. Again, it's not something you need to memorize, but you should be able to know what it is and kind of what it means. So if you understood that, then you're all set. Oh, then there's a great example of the plants and seeds, yada, yada, yada. You read that, and the conclusion. So if you read the conclusion, it just recaps everything I talked about. All right, so that's chapter 4 in a nutshell, so make sure you understand those aspects. Good luck. You'll read chapter 5 next week. We will have a test on Freeman and Freeman, chapter 3 and 4, and my lecture notes. Make sure that you understand coming back here. Let's see. I think make sure that you understand, for example, Bix and Kelps, ELDP levels. Let's see. Elements of a lesson plan. So if you've watched my lectures and you've clipped these things on and you familiarize yourself, you'll do fine in the test. All right, that's it. Hope you all have a great week, and thanks for checking in. I'll see you soon.